Our next speaker, Nathan Westgarth, is Vice President for Product Management at Aries Systems. He's going to be talking about another use case of the UIUX experience and some work that they've done with a couple of their solutions. So Nathan, the stage is yours.
Cheers. Thanks, Todd, for the intro. Hi, everyone. Like Bjorn, it's my first time speaking to the NISO audience. So yeah, it's great to be here. I'll start with a quick introduction. I'm Nathan Westgarth, VP Product Management at Aries Systems. I've been at Aries for a little over a year now, leading the product team, but I've been in product management and product leadership in academic publishing for some time now, having worked on products such as Science Direct, Mendeley, at Elsevier, as well as Dimensions at Digital Science, and working closely with the likes of Altmetric and Figshare in my time there too. So yeah, today I'm pleased to be presenting an overview of the Aries user interface and user experience redesign initiative for our workflow management solutions, Editorial Manager and Production Manager. I'm coming at this also from a product management perspective. I don't claim to be an expert in user experience design or user research, so I'll try to offer a few insights ranging from our sort of strategic approach and methodologies to challenges for a project like this that we're undertaking and how we're attempting to prioritize our efforts. And just caveat, it's still early days in our project, so how successful the approach we're taking is going to be is largely still to be seen. But even if you come away with an appreciation of the complexity of projects like this, or some ideas in case you're undertaking a project like this yourself, I'll be happy. So first, I'll give a quick overview of who we are and what we do, especially for those in the audience that don't necessarily know the Aries brand. You might have come across the products for sure. I don't know. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but it does help set the scene for our products, workflows, and challenges of the UIUX refresh project that we're undertaking. Aries Systems is a market leader in workflow solutions in submission and peer review, as well as post-acceptance production workflows, primarily for academic content and some book content. We now support over 8,500 publications for customers that include many multinational publishers and learned societies. And a couple of points to call out here on this slide. The company was founded in 1986, but was reasonably recently acquired by Elsevier in 2018. And among other benefits of the acquisition, one that certainly relates to this effort that's been incredibly positive for is our access to a whole department of experienced user researchers, visual interaction designers, general expertise in human-centered design, which we can lean on for supporting us in a project development and initiatives like this one I'll talk about today. The other thing to note, however, is that even in our mission statement that we're committed to providing highly customizable, flexible, and innovative workflow solutions designed to help enhance the discovery and dissemination of human knowledge. So efforts to simplify the product interface so they're intuitive and require very little documentation are often met with challenges of massive complexity simply in the customizability and flexibility that we offer to our customers. And ultimately, it's being one of our unique selling points. So it's a challenging set of products to update to really simple user interfaces. Our two major products are Editorial Manager for submission and peer review tracking and Production Manager for commercial production tracking. I suspect most of the audience today would be familiar with EM and especially the author submission workflow for many thousands of journals we support, if not the reviewer and editor workflows that follow on from the submissions. Our products fit into academic market as end-to-end publishing solutions. After the initial author submission to a journal, EM supports the initial evaluation, editor review, peer review, and then decision and revision workflows. Once an accept decision's been made, the manuscript move into Production Manager for copy editing, typesetting, proofing, and corrections, and finally becoming a published journal article, PDF, or HTML, and potentially other formats on publisher websites. But so with that, let me move on to talk about our user interface and user experience refresh initiative. Firstly, a few challenges. We've we've put over 20 years of development into Editorial Manager, a little less for Production Manager, with very few significant user interface updates in that time. Workflows have become more and more configurable, but also more complex over time. But losing that configurability is also challenging because it has become one of the ways we can differentiate our products in the market and accommodate so many different publishers and societies and unique workflows that they already operate with. Users are experiencing difficulties achieving tasks, especially when they're new to the products, and especially without referring to documentation. But tasks users know well often simply take too much time with too many clicks as well. So it's definitely something we're listening to and want to be able to address for our users and taking this project on. The architecture, the complexity of the system, and extensiveness of the product that we've built over the past 2 decades means that a wholesale update it will take time. There's no getting around that. But especially since it will take so much time, we need to prioritize the updates while continuing to enhance the product with new capabilities, and that that our customers and users need in the meantime. We can't stop development to focus solely on the project. So that's what we're dealing with. That's the problem and the challenges. Solution, with all those challenges in mind, the way we're approaching this initiative is with our goals in mind. These are to enhance and simplify the usability of the systems, to modernize the user interfaces, the styles of the interface, and while we're refreshing the entire interface to make sure we're better adhering to standards, whether that's accessibility standards, technology best practices, or design and interaction best standards. How we're planning to measure success of our efforts, be that overall for the project or for individual workflows or interface updates. So for example, to improve product or specific interface net promoter scores, NPS, basically asking, are our users appreciating our updates on the whole? Would they be more likely to recommend the product because of the changes we're making? To improve time and ease to complete tasks, are we addressing the problems that our users are telling us we have in our system? And basically to achieve compliance, for example, in accessibility, aiming at least for web content accessibility guidelines, version 2.1 AA as our benchmark, and that's a very measurable goal. So having set the scene of the challenge and our overall goals, let me dive in a bit more to our strategic approach of the initiative, such as development approach, methodologies, focus, and prioritization of the team and the team that that's undertaking this effort. So regarding our approach, this initiative is a multi-year, multi-phase evolution of the products. There's really no way around that because it's such a complex product and will simply take time to update and iterate on, even if we did have unlimited product engineering and design capacity to work on, which of course we don't. We're going to be releasing enhancements in phases, which means on a particular user journey, users will encounter both new and old designs in the same product, since some areas of the workflows they hit will remain unchanged. We know this will create some challenges for our users, moving between different interface designs, different controls, and inevitably, but also hopefully even start to question why everything isn't using the new design system, and have to manage that experience for them. Which leads to my third point of the approach. We hope to achieve a consistent user experience as soon as possible, with as little disruption as possible for each role, be that author, editor, reviewer, or publisher, alongside minimizing the time for users to experience 2 design systems. We also aren't necessarily bringing in massive sweeping changes on our first iteration of the new design system, sort of minimizing the gap between the two while we're transitioning. Our methodology includes undertaking the project in an agile and iterative way. Glad to hear that same being said for the way that Bjorn approaches development generally and for that project there. Building in flexibility to the schedules and priorities, basically in order to leave room for being able to quickly adapt to important feedback from users at all stages of the project, which has implications for how much detail we can offer on timelines in our marketing communication, for example. And also technical flexibility so that we can iterate further on the design system in future much more easily than through the first initiative. Editorial and Manager and Production Manager are quite complex products with multiple user roles to account for. So trying to figure out how to focus the project like this, especially initially, is important. We've done this primarily looking at factors such as usage data, identifying high traffic, high impact areas of the product, identifying the most frequently noted problems or challenging areas from our customer feedback and user feedback, and looking at entire end-to-end workflows by role. We made the decision primarily to start with the editor role for this initiative, but with a few other updates for other roles included early on as well. The team supporting this initiative is just one of several of our cross-functional agile teams. One of the challenges of doing it this way, segregating a project like this to just one of many teams, however, is that the knowledge and experience of doing the UI and UX updates becomes centered in that team, and also other teams may be largely working against their efforts in any new interfaces and designs that they're creating elsewhere. So as such, we've taken steps to ensure also to get broad support from across Aries development teams for the transformation to adhere, and having all teams adhering to standards that are being produced from the UI UX refresh team across the board for all new work. That won't necessarily mean they have to use the new designs, but certainly adhering to technology and accessibility patterns. So it isn't made more difficult later to update would be ideal. We'll also be having a cross-functional team responsible for the initiative, sharing knowledge with the whole organization throughout what they're doing, whether that's goals and objectives, visual and interaction design decisions, technical approaches, user research, and ultimately outcomes of the project. So, sharing that as widely as we can, and making sure those learnings spread beyond the one team. We've been working on this project for quite a number of months already, but our users have largely not seen any changes to the product until recently, because we've first been focusing on building a solid foundation for success going forward. One of the first things that our UX team have been working on is establishing a design system. The design system's been aligned with an Aries recent rebrand initiative, so that our marketing website and future products should all align on styles, color, tone of voice, etc. We've also been making and testing technology approaches and updating some of the legacy code base we have, which ultimately makes it easier to progress with the project later. And once we do refresh the workflows and interface, it'll be better built for future iterations, basically. Some of the code we're looking at to refresh hasn't had too many updates over the last 20 years. So it seems prudent to audit, if not update, some of the older, more difficult pages to work with. We've also been planning in the project in an iterative approach rather than an entire project up front. That's meant essentially creating a high-level overview of the project in its entirety, identifying some dependencies and blockers that we can see ahead already, but then breaking down the early efforts of the project in much more granular detail than those that are further out, which does, of course, flex the overall estimated timeline and of the effort, but it does build in the mindset of being flexible to feedback and delivering value to our users for every release that we make. So, reiterating a little bit of what Bjorn talked about earlier, and you also, Todd, in the conversation. And finally, I did mention earlier, but we're making sure that we include in our acceptance criteria for every piece of this initiative, that we're adhering to what ultimately are evolving standards, such as good user interaction and visual design principles, as well as technology's best practices, accessibility, compliance, and responsive design, for example, so that in the future our users can access our products more easily on different devices, from desktops and tablets down to mobile. Our new design system interfaces and workflows so far, so having introduced the initiative, this brings me to the part of the presentation to talk about the product changes we've made so far, and our early updates that are available in pilot with our customers already, or ultimately just the work in progress that we have. A quick intro into what we started with in this initiative, which as you'll see is a bit of a mix of the focus areas I mentioned earlier, but beyond these initial efforts, we'll be starting to focus much more on a single user role and their end-to-end experience within the product. The Aries design system was our first effort, which underpins the whole project. Our main navigation bar was our next effort, which was rather high impact since it's an element that is visible on every page across all publisher sites, pages, and used by all roles. It certainly gives us an opportunity to introduce the initiative with a bang, but the visibility of and importance of this area certainly brings its challenges. Author and reviewer main menus and folders was our next effort, being high traffic pages, which basically just introduced some of the visual design changes rather than sweeping UX changes. Maybe one of those smaller things we could have potentially started with. Our reviewer invitation workflows are next, currently in progress. And this is sort of a high impact area that is a legacy editor workflow. And we get feedback from our users having the most challenges in this experience at the moment. And finally, undertaking a separate effort to improve the accessibility of our author submission workflow across an entire role, while leaving the interface and interaction design potentially largely unchanged. So very different, initial focus areas of the project, but important nonetheless. So for the design system, our UX team had developed a relatively comprehensive design system early on, and as efforts were taken to look at redesigns and talking with users about how to achieve those, more components have been and will continue to be introduced to the design system for use throughout the refresh initiative. And having the design system doesn't just improve consistency, it also speeds up the UX and design process up significantly, and we believe a worthy foundation to spend some time on before a project like this. And for those that don't know, UX design systems essentially that it covers things like the color palette that you're going to use, the typography, the icons, and then the general components that you should be consistently using across the product, like the buttons and controls and tables and things like that. You'll see more of those used throughout the next pages I'll show. As mentioned before, the primary navigation bar is an element which impacts all users across the product. You can see the existing nav bar here, which is just at a glance, I'm sure many of you will agree, could use a refresh compared to sort of modern websites, but not as obvious from the screenshot. We actually only support links in the header. We don't even support menus. So there's a lot of things we can improve here. Here is our new navigation bar, which uses our new rebranded style. It does support menus now. So this was a UI and UX update. All functionality was kept, and we did a lot of user research, such as surveys, one-on-one interviews, and activities such as asking users to find a commonly used link within the menu structure to ensure that our navigation and information architecture is intuitive. This effort has also included a pilot program with our customers intentionally, because we've massively simplified the customizability of the menu compared to the previous navigation bar. Feedback from our customers that are trying it now is that the lost customizability for their own journal branding and on the navigation is still key. The journal name itself doesn't necessarily allow for users to differentiate enough which journal site they're on. So we're now back in development, looking at additional options to support journal logos, for example. So this was a good early confirmation about our agile approach, and not necessarily communicating dates in which our customers will be forced to use the new design. So that's been reassuring that our approach has worked well there, given the feedback that we've gotten from the pilot program. User feedback on our author and reviewer main menus essentially said that the information architecture and the usability of these pages was pretty good, as you can see from the current version shown here. But the design certainly needed updating to a new style, as well as ensuring we're meeting accessibility standards, ranging from keyboard navigation, appropriate voiceover support, good color contrast ratios, and appropriately sized link click targets. So this is our new design, which hasn't really changed a great deal in the layout or what's shown there, but it does tick all of those boxes I mentioned on the new style, as well as accessibility requirements under the hood. The enhancements to the author and reviewer main menus also extended into the folders which present the manuscripts that have been submitted or where users have been invited to review. The old design, again shown here, needed a facelift and better accessibility compliance. So this new design, which just at a glance shows a much more visually pleasing way to display and format manuscript data, the status of those manuscripts, and the action links that we have that users can take for each of those manuscripts. That brings me to the reviewer invitation workflow. That's the one in progress at the moment, and it's our first major workflow overhaul. It's in progress at the moment, so designs I show here are still subject to change for any EM users out there that might be expecting something I show to make it differently to the product. But this one in particular is a legacy workflow that has challenges in the experiences, essentially because the functionality has been expanded over the years to support more and more search types and integration with third parties. But the design hasn't had a major overhaul to really accommodate those changes over the years. You can see here a reviewer search where I'm sure the UX designers would be having a fit at the various mixed controls for selecting the type of reviewer search a user wants to use, the sheer amount of controls users are presented with on screen, and how many of the search criteria are presented at once. But essentially, here is our new design, which has had both UI and UX enhancements. As you can see, it's much more simplified interface, still supporting multiple reviewer search types, but now with a more sensible tabbed control for users to switch between them. And only one search criteria presented, since that's usually what people use. Adding new search criterion is very simple where needed. And a lot of data from interviews and surveys brought us to where we are with this, this critical workflow. And after a user is, they performed a reviewer search, we then present the results, which I've shown here is our existing user interface. The search results are basically the most important page in the reviewer invitation workflow, because it supports not only the overview and details of each reviewer, but we also support different selections for either inviting, assigning, inviting as an alternate, or proposing a reviewer built in on the very left, sort of the left columns of the table there. So it is a complex results page, that beyond what you might be dealing with most search results. This is the new redesigned UIUX. First, we'll offer a simplified initial results view with configurable columns of the most important fields that editors use for their decisions, if they can be made quickly or they're maybe more familiar with the reviews presented. And then sort of next, we have an expandable details view for each reviewer in case the editor needs to know more information about someone or they're less familiar with them. Users indicated that there's too much data in this process, making the decision difficult and cumbersome. So we hope that the new design creates a flexible display of important data for that user. And then lastly, on accessibility improvements, we're looking to make initially for the author submission workflow as a separate effort, but generally for the whole refresh initiative we're undertaking. Accessibility, as I'm sure the audience is already on board with, is really important. US CDC estimates that 1 in 4 people have a disability. So that's already a large portion of users that will have specific needs that should be catered for in your product design. Accessibility is about inclusion. Technically, though, it's actually quite beneficial to build in accessibility in the front end and development of a product, because most of the considerations would benefit all users. For our initiative, we've taken an approach getting fundamentals in place early here too. That meant focusing on education and exposure across the teams. We basically want all developers, quality engineers, designers, and product managers to understand the importance and best practices around accessibility. We've taken steps to ensure that accessibility is integrated into design, development, and testing processes, and generally remembering that bad accessibility implementations are often worse than no accessibility at all. Our goal is meeting a minimum web content accessibility guideline 2.1 AA compliance throughout our products, and the way by which we're measuring that is through a combination of undertaking voluntary product accessibility template tests, building in automation testing on accessibility criteria, but also testing with users that have a variety of different accessibility needs that we should be catering for, and seeing if what we're doing works for them. For us, Aries accessibility updates are typically massive backend code changes rather than visual UI UX refresh initiatives. Our refresh initiative includes accessibility update efforts that span both the legacy and new designs, and we're trying to prioritize those by role. So now my final slide was to try and impart some lessons learned for us in case there might be a value for others out there in the audience. We certainly had a few learnings that fit into what I categorized as hindsight is 2020. Maintain your product interfaces through design systems, templates, style sheets, common components, etc. It'd be better not to get yourself into a situation having to do a multi-year project to refresh an interface or workflows of a product in the first place. Yeah, that'd be ideal. Building accessibility in from the start, so not only make your products compliant with regulations and service users with accessibility needs, but also it almost always results in a better design and interface anyway. And of course, every new feature, and for us, every configuration for every new feature we build adds overhead, and especially as a product team making prioritization decisions, we need to think about that overhead and cost for future development and agility for the product. But with all that said, Editorial Manager is over 20 years old and grown organically in that time. A couple of decades ago, building a web product with style sheets and templates, let alone accessibility, an accessible web product, would have been pretty cutting edge. So I guess I point these out to those in the audience involved in product development to consider, are you heading down this sort of path? It'll be better to spend regular efforts to moving to a standardized templates and components, making sure you have accessibility up to date as you go. So some lessons learned so far on our project. Focus on the fundamentals early. I think that's worked well for us. We believe it's set us up for success in the future. And it should pay dividends during and certainly by the end of the initiative, but also, going forward after this is complete. We have used a combination of data and analytics on the product, but have supplemented that with real user testing. So, that's definitely helped. And related to that, we're building in flexibility for adapting to feedback. There's no point doing early user research, running pilots with customers, gathering feedback if you can't actually build in any extra effort to the project to adapt to to what you hear. And finally, start small and iterate. Maybe I'm channeling some of the difficulty we had with starting one of the more complex items with the navigation bar, but I also feel like I'm channeling Bjorn here, repeating the previous suggestion of doing a little thing. But ultimately, the main message I'd impart here is that if you can deliver an improved experience for your users, even just for one part of the interface, of the end-to-end journey, which doesn't jar with the rest of the product journey negatively, why wouldn't you get that out to them as soon as possible? There we go.
Thank you, Nathan. I have a question for you. And as an organization that has multiple communities touching on your system, right? You've got the editors and you've got the publication staff, but you've also got the authors who are feeding into your system. How do you manage from a user experience perspective if there are competing demands on the system that maybe are conflicting? How do you manage that? Like, who is your user and who are you designing it for? What if the editors want one thing and the authors want something else on the same interface? How do you manage that?
That's yeah, I guess the way we've typically managed it is super configurable product that we can build something for the authors and the editors. I'm not sure that's necessarily the best way to go about it. It gets us where we are now. But that's a really interesting question, and maybe one that's fundamentally changing in a publisher's mindset these days, that ultimately the authors are their customers as well. And should we not just be building the best experience for the authors and reviewers, because that leads to success as a publisher? And so I think that the focus has to be on both. Everyone's trying to do a job in these systems. They have to do that well. But yeah, I think you've seen a bit of a shift. Certainly in
Yeah.
recent years, especially towards the authors and reviewers, more so from publishers. So.
Right, exactly. I would think, from a, who are your customers in a world where we're moving more and more towards an author pays model. The author is more of the customer than the in a previous world, there were other customers. So it's kind of interesting to see where that heads in a development perspective.
Yeah, and even more challenging is that sometimes these are the same people that wear different hats at different times of the day. So it's it gets pretty complex pretty quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because sometimes, usually the editor is the one, they're also authors at different times. That's how you become an editor.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, Nathan, thank you so much. I really appreciate your thoughts and insight. Again, I like the fact that you were kind of hearkening back to some of Bjorn's and some of the other speakers' points. I appreciate that.
Thanks for
And
having me.
and thanks for joining us late in the evening. I hope you can now get some rest.